Hi, everybody. My name's John Foran. I'm speaking to you from my living room in Santa Barbara, California. It's Friday, June 23rd, 2017, and I'm preparing this video presentation for a conference that's happening on Saturday, June 24th, in Tucson, Arizona, where temperatures are well over 100 degrees. Ironically enough, at the conference of the Association of Environmental Studies and Sciences, having their annual meeting. And the AESS has very graciously seen the wisdom of my presenting remotely without creating any greenhouse gases to speak of, and to do my presentation this way. And I'm very grateful for them seeing the wisdom of that. This presentation is about climate fiction, a genre of literature that is coming into its own in this era of the Anthropocene. And as a professor of sociology who teaches courses on Earth in Crisis, on climate justice, and just recently this past spring, a course called The World in 2050, Sustainable Development and Its Alternatives, I'm very interested in the possibility, the power, and the potential of storytelling to afford solutions or ways into and through the climate crisis that marks our century as the defining existential question faced by humanity. As a medium, along with other forms of cultural production, such as videos themselves, films, music, art, a medium that is especially attractive to and suggests itself for the skill set of the students that I teach, young people in their late teens and early 20s for the most part, who are the ones who are going to actually come together, hopefully, with intergenerationally, with elders and others, with, in fact, everybody alive on the planet at this time, to create what we need in this situation, which is the formation of the greatest, broadest, deepest, most radical social movement in the history of the world, a movement for global climate justice. This I see as a student of social movements and a scholar who attends the UN climate negotiations for the past 5-6 years. I see the only way forward is the formation of such a movement, and I'm very much interested in all of the ways in which stories, emotions, subjectivity, and personal experiences are enabling this emergent movement. So hence my professional and to some degree personal interest in the power of stories, and in particular this new genre of climate fiction. So this talk is about a novella which I dream of writing, which I have not written, but which I see a need for, although I'm probably not the person to write it, to be one of those stories that helps people feel enabled, empowered, enthused, inspired, and desirous of participating in such a movement for such a great purpose. Last fall, in October of 2016, I gave a talk on this very precise project underway at a nearly carbon neutral conference that we held here at UC Santa Barbara called The World in 2050. That was enabled by the vision and the work of my colleague Ken Hiltner, a professor of English, who sort of pioneered and then we modeled the possibility of having an entire conference done remotely. And you can simply look up The World in 2050, UC Santa Barbara, and see the conference that we put together, which I recommend to you as a model of the future because of its openness, its democratic nature, that anyone in the world can participate, can attend, that has a almost non-existent carbon footprint, and which can be put on with virtually no budget. So I'm immensely excited about that model. I would urge people who are at all interested after hearing this talk to go take a look at what I said there, because there I go into some detail, and I think perhaps more articulately than I feel at this moment, into the genesis of this project and how one of its origins is my reading of a great piece called The Coming Collapse of Western Civilization, A View from the Future, written by historians of science Naomi, Oreskes, and Richard Conway, in which the setting is the year 2373, 300 years anniversary after sort of a great turning point that the inhabitants of Earth managed to create for themselves in 2073, when in the midst of a crisis they finally started to make that slow turn, the great turning, the great transformation in everything, all systems, that is needed to weather the storm, to even survive this storm. And what I critiqued about that excellent work, so precious that we have it, a very short 100-page novella, really. But what I critiqued about it was that it didn't posit the potential of a social movement arising to assure a better outcome than the one described in their book, which is essentially a cautionary tale of sort of humans continuing with business as usual for far too long in this moment, the first quarter of the 21st century, before really disaster and rock bottom crisis forced their hand. We can do better than that. I believe that firmly as a sociologist who studies movements for radical social change and who is deeply immersed now in the sort of multiple crises exacerbated by the biggest one of all, the climate chaos that we're descending into, on top of the crises of globalization with the radical inequality that it drives, the crisis of faith politically, confidence in almost all existing governments and most existing political parties, and the culture of violence that pervades life on Earth today, from the most intimate interpersonal relationships all the way up to the wars that are fought in our name and the blood being spilled in our name. Of course, in the fall of 2016, we didn't have yet the election that brought us Donald Trump as president of the United States. And since then, one might even argue that reality has taken on a kind of fictional, surreal quality, because so many things are being said and done that seemed unimaginable a year ago. And maybe that is reason for hope, of course, because from a social movement point of view, the election of Donald Trump has been a very big wake-up call to a broad spectrum of movements that need to grow quickly in order to meet this crisis. So what does all of this have to do with writing climate fiction, a new kind of climate fiction? Well, before giving my 2 cents on what should be written by someone else, let me talk about 2 other works that I use in my class, The World in 2050, that I think are extremely valuable for students to read because they are both realistic and hopeful about a different future. And the first of these is a book called The World We Made, Alex McKay's story from 2050, which is written by Jonathan Porritt, who's based in the United Kingdom and played a major role in the origins of the Green Party there. This book is set in 2050 in London, And it's told from the perspective of a professor in a school, Alex McKay. And he kind of tells the story about how citizens, a great citizens movement, arose in the late 20 teens, led by young people, a movement called Enough, which then set in motion not a complete and radical supersession of capitalism, but actually was able to rein in neoliberal globalization in such a way as to make it almost unrecognizable by 2050. And while it's not a utopia by any means in 2050, it's a world in which the renewable energy transition has been made, in which vast global inequality has been substantially reduced. And the book is beautiful in the sense that it has short chapters that go into detail about all of this. And so, for example, I flagged a couple pages. It's really richly illustrated. There's this picture of the view from Alex McKay's house, overlooking the gardens and the school where he teaches. And another page I flagged is this about religion, spirituality, and climate justice, in which evangelicals unite around the issue of food waste. And finally, among many others, this is a futuristic direct air capture device, which interestingly enough, I read about in some news item that crossed my computer today, that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Again, a long story and a long conversation to be had about geoengineering and all of this. Let's not have that right now. The second piece I want to mention is a little book called Journey to Earthland, The Great Transition to Planetary Civilization by Paul Raskin, who is an intellectual and a bit of a futurist, in which, again, it's not written as a fiction with characters, but it is a speculative account of potential future scenarios for the Earth, in which there's a kind of business as usual disaster scenario, and in which there is finally an alternative out of several. There's 6 altogether, variants on 3 main ones, called Earthland, which is his vision of a kind of realistic, best possible obtainable future. And I'll quote to you from that book. I can see I'm going to run out of time before I talk about my novella, but I actually think that's okay, because that's not yet written. And I don't know if I'm the person to write it. So let me read to you a bit of Paul Raskin's Journey to Earthland. Victor Hugo once noted that nothing is so powerful as an idea whose time has come. In the planetary phase, the idea of one world had finally arrived, but the reality did not fall from the sky. It took a tenacious few to sow the seeds as social conditions enriched the soil. The rest, as they say, is history. With profound gratitude, we honor the pivotal generations of the transition that rose to the promise of Earthland when the century was still young. Living in yesterday's tomorrow, we proudly confirm what they could only imagine. Another world was possible. And on the very last page of this book, which is only 113 pages, he writes, to conclude it, "The hour of choice presses fast upon us, with the future ours to win or lose. We can drift deeper into the maelstrom, too cynical and timid to seize the promise, or we can, with courage and vision, write this century's story in the language of humanism and sustainability. The vision of an organic planetary civilization lies before us as possibility and exigency. We may never reach that distant shore, but what matters most is imagining its contours and traveling in its direction. The quest for a civilized Earthland beckons us, the journey its own reward and privilege." So let this be the talk and the books I've referenced be an invitation to others to take up this challenge of telling these new stories that we need to get us to the future that we want. Thank you very much.